Chapter 46 of The Princess Casamassima by Henry James. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. "I have received a letter from your husband," Paul Muniman said to the Princess, the next evening, as soon as he came into the room. He announced this fact with a kind of bald promptitude, and with a familiarity of manner which showed that his visit was one of a closely connected series. The Princess was evidently not a little surprised by it, and immediately asked how in the world the Prince could know his address. "Couldn't it have been by your old lady?" Muniman inquired. "He must have met her in Paris. It is from Paris that he writes." "What an incorrigible cad!" the Princess exclaimed. "I don't see that, for writing to me. I have his letter in my pocket, and I will show it to you if you like." "Thank you, nothing would induce me to touch anything he has touched," the Princess replied. "You touch his money, my dear lady," Muniman remarked, with the quiet smile of a man who sees things as they are. The Princess hesitated a little. "Yes, I make an exception for that, because it hurts him. It makes him suffer." "I should think, on the contrary, it would gratify him by showing you in a condition of weakness and dependence." "Not when he knows I don't use it for myself. What exasperates him is that it is devoted to ends that he hates almost as much as he hates me, and yet which he can't call selfish." "He doesn't hate you," said Muniman, with that tone of pleasant reasonableness that he used when he was most imperturbable. "His letter satisfies me of that." The Princess stared at this, and asked him what he was coming to, whether he was leading up to advising her to go back and live with her husband. "I don't know that I would go so far as to advise," he replied, "when I have so much benefit from seeing you here on your present footing. That wouldn't sound well. But I'll just make bold to prophesy that you will go before very long." "And on what does that extraordinary prediction rest?" "On this plain fact, that you will have nothing to live upon. You decline to read the Prince's letter, but if you were to look at it, it would give you evidence of what I mean. He informs me that I need count upon no more supplies from your hands, as you yourself will receive no more." "He addresses you that way, in plain terms?" "I can't call them very plain, because the letter is written in French, and I naturally have had a certain difficulty in making it out, in spite of my persevering study of the tongue and the fine example set me by poor Robinson. But that appears to be the gist of the matter." "And you can repeat such an insult to me without the smallest apparent discomposure? You're the most remarkable man," the Princess broke out. "Why is it an insult? It is the simple truth. I do take your money," said Paul Muniman. "You take it for a sacred cause. You don't take it for yourself." "The Prince isn't obliged to look at that," Muniman rejoined, laughing. His companion was silent for a moment. Then, "I didn't know you were on his side," she replied gently. "Oh, you know on what side I am." "What does he know? What business has he to address you so?" "I suppose he knows from Madame Grandoni. She has told him that I have great influence upon you." "She was welcome to tell him that," the Princess exclaimed. "His reasoning, therefore, has been that when I find you have nothing more to give to the cause, I will let you go." "Nothing more? And does he count me, myself, and every pulse of my being, every capacity of my nature, as nothing?" the Princess cried, with shining eyes. "Apparently he thinks that I do." "Oh, as for that, after all, I have known that you care far more for my money than for me, but it has made no difference to me," said the Princess. "Then you see that by your own calculation the Prince is right." "My dear sir," Muniman's hostess replied, "my interest in you never depended on your interest in me. It depended wholly on a sense of your great destinies. I suppose that what you began to tell me is that he stops my allowance." "From the 1st of next month. He has taken legal advice. It is now clear, so he tells me, that you forfeit your settlements." "Can I not take legal advice too?" the Princess asked. "Surely I can contest that. I can forfeit my settlements only by an act of my own. The act that led to our separation was his act. He turned me out of the house by physical violence." "Certainly," said Muniment, displaying even in this simple discussion his easy aptitude for argument. "But since then there have been acts of your own." He stopped a moment, smiling. Then he went on. "Your whole connection with the secret society constitutes an act, and so does your exercise of the pleasure, which you appreciate so highly, of feeding it with money extorted from an old Catholic and princely family. You know how little it is to be desired that these matters should come to light." "Why in the world need they come to light? Allegations in plenty, of course, he would have, but not a particle of proof. Even if Madame Grandoni were to testify against me, which is inconceivable, she would not be able to produce a definite fact." "She would be able to produce the fact that you had a little bookbinder staying for a month in your house." "What has that to do with it?" the Princess demanded. "If you mean that that is a circumstance which would put me in the wrong as against the Prince, is there not on the other side this circumstance, that while our young friend was staying with me, Madame Grandoni herself, a person of the highest and most conspicuous respectability, never saw fit to withdraw from me her countenance and protection? Besides, why shouldn't I have my bookbinder, just as I might have, and the Prince should surely appreciate my consideration in not having, my physician and my chaplain?" "Am I not your chaplain?" said Muniment with a laugh. "And does the bookbinder usually dine at the Princess's table?" "Why not, if he's an artist? In the old times, I know, artists dined with the servants, but not to-day." "That would be for the court to appreciate," Muniment remarked. And in a moment he added, "Allow me to call your attention to the fact that Madame Grandoni has left you, has withdrawn her countenance and protection." "Ah, but not for Hyacinth," the Princess returned, in a tone which would have made the fortune of an actress if an actress could have caught it. "For the bookbinder or for the chaplain, it doesn't matter. But that's only a detail," said Muniment. "In any case, I shouldn't in the least care for your going to law." The Princess rested her eyes upon him for a while in silence, and at last she replied, "I was speaking just now of your great destinies, but every now and then you do something, you say something, that makes me doubt of them. It's when you seem afraid. That's terribly against your being a first-rate man." "Oh, I know, you have thought me a coward from the first of your knowing me. But what does it matter? I haven't the smallest pretension to being a first-rate man." "Oh, you are deep and you are provoking," murmured the Princess with a sombre eye. "Don't you remember," Muniment continued, without heeding this somewhat passionate ejaculation, "don't you remember how, the other day, you accused me of being not only a coward, but a traitor, of playing false, of wanting, as you said, to back out?" "Most distinctly. How could I help its coming over me at times that you have incalculable ulterior views and are only using me, only using us all? But I don't care." "No, no, I'm genuine," said Paul Muniment simply, yet in a tone which might have implied that the discussion was idle. And he immediately went on with a transition too abrupt for perfect civility. "The best reason in the world for your not having a lawsuit with your husband is this, that when you haven't a penny left, you will be obliged to go back and live with him." "How do you mean, when I haven't a penny left? Haven't I my own property?" the Princess demanded. "The Prince tells me that you have drawn upon your own property at such a rate that the income to be derived from it amounts, to his positive knowledge, to no more than 1,000 francs, £40 a year. Surely with your habits and tastes you can't live on £40. I should add that your husband implies that your property originally was but a small affair." "You have the most extraordinary tone," observed the Princess gravely. What you appear to wish to express is simply this, that from the moment I have no more money to give you, I am of no more value than the skin of an orange." Muniment looked down at his shoe for a while. His companion's words had brought a flush into his cheek. He appeared to admit to himself and to her that at the point at which their conversation had arrived there was a natural difficulty in his delivering himself. But presently he raised his head, showing a face still slightly embarrassed, but none the less bright and frank. "I have no intention whatever of saying anything harsh or offensive to you, but since you challenge me, perhaps it is well that I should let you know that I do consider that in giving your money, or rather your husband's, to our business, you gave the most valuable thing you had to contribute." "This is the day of plain truths," the Princess exclaimed, with a laugh that was not expressive of pleasure. "You don't count then any devotion, any intelligence, that I may have placed at your service, even rating my faculties modestly?" "I count your intelligence, but I don't count your devotion, and one is nothing without the other. You are not trusted at headquarters." "Not trusted?" the Princess repeated with her splendid stare. "Why, I thought I could be hanged to-morrow." "They may let you hang, perfectly, without letting you act. You are liable to be weary of us," Paul Muniment went on, "and indeed I think you are weary of us already." "Ah, you must be a first-rate man, you are such a brute," replied the Princess, who noticed, as she had noticed before, that he pronounced weary, weary. "I didn't say that you were weary of me," said Muniment, blushing again. "You can never live poor. You don't begin to know the meaning of it." "Oh no, I am not tired of you," the Princess returned in a strange tone. "In a moment you will make me cry with passion, and no man has done that for years. I was very poor when I was a girl," she added in a different manner. "You yourself recognized it just now, in speaking of the insignificant character of my fortune." "It had to be a fortune to be insignificant," said Muniment, smiling. "You will go back to your husband." To this declaration she made no answer whatever. She only sat looking at him in a sort of desperate calmness. "I don't see, after all, why they trust you more than they trust me," she remarked. "I am not sure that they do," said Muniment. "I have heard something this evening which suggests that." "And may one know what it is?" "A communication which I should have expected to be made through me has been made through another person." "A communication?" "To Hyacinth Robinson." "To Hyacinth?" The Princess sprang up. She had turned pale in a moment. "He has got his ticket, but they didn't send it through me." "Do you mean his orders? He was here last night," the Princess said. "A fellow named Schinkel, a German, whom you don't know, I think, but who was a sort of witness, with me and another, of his undertaking, came to see me this evening. It was through him the summons came, and he put Hyacinth up to it on Sunday night." "On Sunday night?" The Princess stared. "Why, he was here yesterday, and he talked of it, and he told me nothing." "That was quite right of him, bless him!" Muniment exclaimed. The Princess closed her eyes a moment, and when she opened them again Muniment had risen and was standing before her. "What do they want him to do?" she asked. "I am like Hyacinth. I had better not tell you, at least till it's over." "And when will it be over?" "They give him several days, and I believe minute instructions," said Muniment, "with, however, considerable discretion in respect to seizing his chance. The thing is made remarkably easy for him. All this I know from Schinkel, who himself knew nothing on Sunday, being a mere medium of transmission, but who saw Hyacinth yesterday morning." "Schinkel trusts you, then?" the Princess remarked. Muniment looked at her steadily a moment. "Yes, but he won't trust you. Hyacinth is to receive a card of invitation to a certain big house," he went on, "a card with the name left in a blank, so that he may fill it out himself. It is to be good for each of 2 grand parties, which are to be given at a few days' interval. That's why they give him the job, because at a grand party he'll look in his place." "He will like that," said the Princess musingly, "repaying hospitality with a pistol shot." "If he doesn't like it, he needn't do it." The Princess made no rejoinder to this, but in a moment she said, "I can easily find out the place you mean, the big house where 2 parties are to be given at a few days' interval, and where the master is worth your powder." "Easily, no doubt. And do you want to warn him?" "No, I want to do the business first, so that it won't be left for another. If Hyacinth will look in his place at a grand party, should not I look still more in mine? And, as I know the individual, I should be able to approach him without exciting the smallest suspicion." Munimet appeared to consider her suggestion a moment, as if it were practical and interesting, but presently he added placidly, "To fall by your hand would be too good for him." "However he falls, it will be useful, valuable?" the Princess asked. "It's worth trying. He's a very bad institution." "And you don't mean to go near Hyacinth?" "No, I wish to leave him free," Munimet answered. "Ah, Paul Munimet," murmured the Princess, "you are a first-rate man." She sank down upon the sofa and sat looking up at him. "In God's name, why have you told me this?" she broke out. "So that you should not be able to throw it up at me later that I had not." She threw herself over, burying her face in the cushions, and remained so for some minutes in silence. Munimet watched her a while without speaking, but at last he remarked, "I don't want to aggravate you, but you will go back." The words failed to cause her even to raise her head, and after a moment he quietly went out. Chapter 46. Chapter 47 of The Princess Casamassima by Henry James. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. That the Princess had done with him for ever, remained the most vivid impression that Hyacinth had carried away from Madeira Crescent the night before. He went home, and he flung himself on his narrow bed, where the consolation of sleep again descended upon him. But he woke up with the earliest dawn, and the beginning of a new day was a quick revival of pain. He was overpast. He had become vague. He was extinct. The things that Sholto had said to him came back to him, and the compassion of foreknowledge that Madame Grandoni had shown him from the first. Of Paul Munimet he only thought to wonder whether he knew. An insurmountable desire to do justice to him, for the very reason that there might be a temptation to oblique thoughts, forbade him to challenge his friend even in imagination. He vaguely wondered whether he would ever be superseded, but this possibility faded away in a stronger light, a kind of dazzling vision of some great tribuneship which swept before him now and again, and in which the figure of the Princess herself seemed merged and extinguished. When full morning came at last, and he got up, it brought with it, in the restlessness which made it impossible to him to remain in his room, a return of that beginning of an answerless question. After all, which the Princess had planted there the night before, when she spoke so bravely in the name of revolution. After all, since nothing else was tried, or would apparently ever be tried. He had a sense of his mind, which had been made up, falling to pieces again, but that sense in turn lost itself in a shudder which was already familiar, the horror of the reappearance on his part of the imbrued hands of his mother. This loathing of the idea of a repetition had not been sharp, strangely enough, till his summons came. In all his previous meditations the growth of his reluctance to act for the party of action had not been the fear of a personal stain, but the simple extension of his observation. Yet now the idea of the personal stain made him horribly sick. It seemed by itself to make service impossible. It rose before him like a kind of backward accusation of his mother. To suffer it to start out in the life of her son was in a manner to place her own forgotten, redeemed pollution again in the eye of the world. The thought that was most of all with him was that he had time. He had time. He was grateful for that, and saw a kind of delicacy in their having given him a margin, not condemned to be pressed by the hours. He had another day, he had 2 days, he might take 3, he might take several. He knew he should be terribly weary of them before they were over, but for that matter they would be over whenever he liked. Anyhow, he went forth again into the streets, into the squares, into the park, solicited by an aimless desire to steep himself yet once again in the great indifferent city which he knew and loved, and which had had so many of his smiles and tears and confidences. The day was grey and damp, though no rain fell, and London had never appeared to him to wear more proudly and publicly the stamp of her imperial history. He passed slowly to and fro over Westminster Bridge, and watched the black barges drift on the great brown river, and looked up at the huge fretted palace that rose there as a fortress of the social order which he, like the young David, had been commissioned to attack with a sling and a pebble. At last he made his way to St. James's Park, and he strolled about a long time. He revolved around it, and he went a considerable distance up the thoroughfare that communicates with Pimlico. He stopped at a certain point and came back again, and then he retraced his steps in the former direction. He looked in the windows of shops, and he looked in particular into the long glazed expanse of that establishment in which, at that hour of the day, Millicent Henning discharged superior functions. Millicent's image had descended upon him after he came out, and now it moved before him as he went, it clung to him, it refused to quit him. He made, in truth, no effort to drive it away. He held fast to it in return, and it murmured strange things in his ear. She had been so jolly to him on Sunday. She was such a strong, obvious, simple nature, with such a generous breast, and such a freedom from the sophistries of civilization. All that he had ever liked in her came back to him now with a finer air, and there was a moment during which he hung over the rail of the bridge that spans the lake in St. James's Park, and mechanically followed the movement of the swans, when he asked himself whether at bottom he hadn't liked her better almost than any one. He tried to think he had, he wanted to think he had, and he seemed to see the look her eyes would have if he should tell her that he had. Something of that sort had really passed between them on Sunday, only the business that had come up since had superseded it. Now the taste of the vague, primitive comfort that his Sunday had given him came back to him, and he asked himself whether he mightn't know it a second time. After he had thought he couldn't again wish for anything, he found himself wishing that he might believe there was something Millicent could do for him. Mightn't she help him? Mightn't she even extricate him? He was looking into a window, not that of her own shop, when a vision rose before him of a quick flight with her for an undefined purpose to an undefined spot, and he was glad at that moment to have his back turned to the people in the street, because his face suddenly grew red to the tips of his ears. Again and again, all the same, he indulged in the reflection that spontaneous, uncultivated minds often have inventions, inspirations. Moreover, whether Millicent should have any or not, he might at least feel her arms around him. He didn't exactly know what good it would do him or what door it would open, but he should like it. The sensation was not one he could afford to defer, but the nearest moment at which he could enjoy it would be that evening. He had thrown over everything, but she would be busy all day. Nevertheless, it would be a gain, it would be a kind of foretaste to see her earlier, to have 3 words with her. He wrestled with the temptation to go into her haberdasher's, because he knew she didn't like it (he had tried it once of old), as the visits of gentlemen, even when ostensible purchasers (there were people watching about who could tell who was who), compromised her in the eyes of her employers. This was not an ordinary case, however, and though he hovered about the place a long time, undecided, embarrassed, half ashamed, at last he went in, as by an irresistible necessity. He would just make an appointment with her, and a glance of the eye and a single word would suffice. He remembered his way through the labyrinth of the shop. He knew that her department was on the second floor. He walked through the place, which was crowded, as if he had as good a right to it as any one else, and as he had entertained himself on rising with putting on his holiday garments, in which he made such a distinguished little figure, he was not suspected of any purpose more nefarious than that of looking for some nice thing to give a lady. He ascended the stairs and found himself in a large room where made-up articles were exhibited, and where, though there were 20 people in it, a glance told him he shouldn't find Millicent. She was perhaps in the next one, into which he passed by a wide opening. Here also were numerous purchasers, most of them ladies, the men were but 3 or 4, and the disposal of the wares was in the hands of neat young women attired in black dresses with long trains. At first it appeared to Hyacinth that the young woman he sought was even here not within sight, and he was turning away to look elsewhere, when suddenly he perceived that a tall gentleman standing in the middle of the room was none other than Captain Sholto. It next became plain to him that the person standing upright before the captain, as still as a lay figure, and with her back turned to Hyacinth, was the object of his own quest. In spite of her averted face, he instantly recognized Millicent. He knew her shop attitude, the dressing of her hair behind, and the long, grand lines of her figure, draped in the last new thing. She was exhibiting this article to the captain, and he was lost in contemplation. He had been beforehand with Hyacinth as a false purchaser, but he imitated a real one better than our young man, as, with his eyes travelling up and down the front of Millicent's person, he frowned consideringly, and rubbed his lower lip slowly with his walking-stick. Millicent stood admirably still, and the back view of the garment she displayed was magnificent. Hyacinth for a minute stood as still as she. At the end of that minute he perceived that Sholto saw him, and for an instant he thought he was going to direct Millicent's attention to him. But Sholto only looked at him very hard for a few seconds without telling her he was there. To enjoy that satisfaction he would wait till the interloper was gone. Hyacinth gazed back at him for the same length of time. What these 2 pairs of eyes said to each other requires perhaps no definite mention, and then turned away. That evening, about 9 o'clock, the Princess Casamassima drove in a hansom to Hyacinth's lodgings in Westminster. The door of the house was a little open, and a man stood on the steps smoking his big pipe and looking up and down. The Princess, seeing him while she was still at some distance, had hoped he was Hyacinth, but he proved to be a very different figure indeed from her devoted young friend. He had not a forbidding countenance, but he looked very hard at her as she descended from her hansom and approached the door. She was used to being looked at hard, and she didn't mind this. She supposed he was one of the lodgers in the house. He edged away to let her pass, and watched her while she endeavoured to impart an elasticity of movement to the limp bell-pull beside the door. It gave no audible response, so that she said to him, "I wish to ask for Mr. Hyacinth Robinson. Perhaps you can tell me?" "Yes, I too," the man replied, smiling. "I have come also for that." The Princess hesitated a moment. "I think you must be Mr. Shinkle. I have heard of you." "You know me by my bad English," her interlocutor remarked, with a sort of benevolent coquetry. "Your English is remarkably good. I wish I spoke German as well. only just a hint of an accent, and evidently an excellent vocabulary. "I think I have heard also of you," said Schinkel appreciatively. "Yes, we know each other in our circle, don't we? We are all brothers and sisters." The Princess was anxious, she was in a fever, but she could still relish the romance of standing in a species of back slum and fraternizing with a personage looking like a very tame horse whose collar galled him. "Then he's at home, I hope. He is coming down to you?" she went on. "That's what I don't know. I am waiting." "Have they gone to call him?" Schinkel looked at her while he puffed his pipe. "I have called him myself, but he will not say." "How do you mean, he will not say?" "His door is locked. I have knocked many times." "I suppose he is out," said the Princess. "Yes, he may be out," Schinkel remarked judicially. He and the Princess stood a moment looking at each other, and then she asked, "Have you any doubt of it?" "Oh, es kann sein. Only the woman of the house told me 5 minutes ago that he came in." "Well, then he probably went out again," the Princess remarked. "Yes, but she didn't hear him." The Princess reflected, and was conscious that she was flushing. She knew what Schinkel knew about their young friend's actual situation, and she wished to be very clear with him, and to induce him to be the same with her. She was rather baffled, however, by the sense that he was cautious, and justly cautious. He was polite and inscrutable, quite like some of the high personages, ambassadors and cabinet ministers, whom she used to meet in the great world. "Has the woman been here in the house ever since?" she asked in a moment. "No, she went out for 10 minutes, half an hour ago." "Surely, then, he may have gone out again in that time!" the Princess exclaimed. "That is what I have thought. It is also why I have waited here," said Schinkel. "I have nothing to do," he added serenely. "Neither have I," the Princess rejoined. "We can wait together." "It's a pity you haven't got some room," the German suggested. "No, indeed, this will do very well. We shall see him sooner when he comes back." "Yes, but perhaps it won't be for long." "I don't care for that. I will wait. I hope you don't object to my company," she went on, smiling. "It is good, it is good," Schinkel responded through his smoke. "Then I will send away my cab." She returned to the vehicle and paid the driver, who said, "Thank you, my lady," with expression, and drove off. "You gave him too much," observed Schinkel when she came back. "Oh, he looked a nice man. I'm sure he deserved it." "It is very expensive," Schinkel went on sociably. "Yes, and I have no money, but it's done. Was there no one else in the house while the woman was away?" the Princess asked. "No, the people are out. She has only single men. I asked her that. She has a daughter, but the daughter has gone to see her cousin. The mother went only 100 yards, round the corner there, to buy a pennyworth of milk. She locked this door and put the key in her pocket. She stayed at the grocer's where she got the milk, to have a little conversation with a friend she met there. You know, ladies always stop like that, nicht wahr? It was half an hour later that I came. She told me that he was at home, and I went up to his room. I got no sound, as I have told you. I came down and spoke to her again, and she told me what I say." "Then you determined to wait, as I have done," said the Princess. "Oh, yes, I want to see him." "So do I, very much." The Princess said nothing more for a minute. Then she added, "I think we want to see him for the same reason." "Das kann sein, das kann sein." The two continued to stand there in the brown evening, and they had some further conversation of a desultory and irrelevant kind. At the end of 10 minutes the Princess broke out in a low tone, laying her hand on her companion's arm. "Mr. Schinkel, this won't do. I'm intolerably nervous." "Yes, that is the nature of ladies," the German replied imperturbably. "I wish to go up to his room," the Princess pursued. "You will be so good as to show me where it is?" It will do you no good if he is not there." The Princess hesitated. "I am not sure he is not there." "Well, if he won't speak, it shows he likes better not to have visitors." "Oh, he may like to have me better than he does you," the Princess exclaimed. "Das kann sein, das kann sein." But Schinkel made no movement to introduce her into the house. "There is nothing to-night. You know what I mean," the Princess remarked, after looking at him a moment. "Nothing to-night?" "At the Duke's. The first party is on Thursday, the other is next Tuesday." "Schön. I never go to parties," said Schinkel. "Neither do I." "Except that this is a kind of party, you and me," suggested Schinkel. "Yes, and the woman of the house doesn't approve of it." The footstep of the personage in question had become audible in the passage through the open door, which was presently closed from within with a little reprehensive bang. Something in this incident appeared to quicken exceedingly the Princess's impatience and emotion. The menace of exclusion from the house made her wish more even than before to enter it. "For God's sake, Mr. Schinkel, take me up there. If you won't, I will go alone," she pleaded. Her face was white now, and it need hardly be added that it was beautiful. The German considered it a moment in silence, then turned and reopened the door and went in, followed closely by his companion. There was a light in the lower region, which tempered the gloom of the staircase, as high, that is, as the first floor. The ascent the rest of the way was so dusky that the pair went slowly, and Schinkel led the Princess by the hand. She gave a suppressed exclamation as she rounded a sharp turn in the second flight. "Good God! Is that his door with the light?" "Yes, you can see under it. There was a light before," said Schinkel, without confusion. "And why, in heaven's name, didn't you tell me?" "Because I thought it would worry you." "And it doesn't worry you?" "A little, but I don't mind," said Schinkel. "Very likely he may have left it." "He doesn't leave candles," the Princess returned with vehemence. She hurried up the few remaining steps to the door, and paused there with her ear against it. Her hand grasped the handle, and she turned it, but the door resisted. Then she murmured pantingly to her companion, "We must go in, we must go in." "What will you do when it's locked?" he inquired. "You must break it down." "It is very expensive," said Schinkel. "Don't be abject," cried the Princess. "In a house like this the fastenings are certainly flimsy. They will easily yield." "And if he is not there? If he comes back and finds what we have done?" She looked at him a moment through the darkness, which was mitigated only by the small glow proceeding from the chink. "He is there. Before God, he is there." "Schön, schön," said her companion, as if he felt the contagion of her own dread, but was deliberating and meant to remain calm. The Princess assured him that one or two vigorous thrusts with his shoulder would burst the bolt. It was sure to be some wretched morsel of tin, and she made way for him to come close. He did so, he even leaned against the door, but he gave no violent push, and the Princess waited with her hand against her heart. Schinkel apparently was still deliberating. At last he gave a low sigh. "I know they found him the pistol. It is only for that," he murmured, and the next moment Christina saw him sway sharply to and fro in the gloom. She heard a crack and saw that the lock had yielded. The door collapsed. They were in the light. They were in a small room which looked full of things. The light was that of a single candle on the mantel. It was so poor that for a moment she made out nothing definite. Before the moment was over, however, her eyes had attached themselves to the small bed. There was something on it, something black, something ambiguous, something outstretched. Schinkel held her back, but only for an instant. She saw everything, and with the very act she flung herself beside the bed upon her knees. Hyacinth lay there as if he were asleep, but there was a horrible thing, a mess of blood, on the bed, in his side, in his heart. His arm hung limp beside him, downwards, off the narrow couch. His face was white, and his eyes were closed. So much Schinkel saw, but only for an instant. A convulsive movement of the Princess, bending over the body, while a strange low cry came from her lips, covered it up. He looked about him for the weapon, for the pistol, but the Princess, in her rush at the bed, had pushed it out of sight with her knees. "It's a pity they found it. If he hadn't had it there!" he exclaimed to her. He had determined to remain calm, so that on turning round at the quick advent of the little woman of the house, who had hurried up, white, scared, staring, at the sound of the crashing door, he was able to say very quietly and gravely, "Mr. Robinson has shot himself through the heart. He must have done it while you were fetching the milk." The Princess got up, hearing another person in the room, and then Schinkel perceived the small revolver lying just under the bed. He picked it up and carefully placed it on the mantel-shelf, keeping, equally carefully, to himself the reflection that it would certainly have served much better